Hi, welcome back to Elite Literary Book Group. This is Rachel Beck, and I'm going to look at chapter 2 and 3 for this next part. And the reason why I'm going to do those together is because they both are more about the people surrounding this time and surrounding what exactly was the jazz era. So that's from that standpoint, just like with the first video, when I looked at Fitzgerald's life and some biographical things and applied that to the text, we're also going to do that here, which is called Historicism. And that's looking at the history of what happened and the culture and how that affected the text. I think that definitely you could make a case for historicism based on this time period, because for so many people, with it being post-World War I, it seemed like it inspired a whole new style. And that style is going to be considered modern pieces of not only literature but art in general. You'll see it also in Mrs. Dalloway, her stream of consciousness. Hemingway uses a stream of consciousness. James Joyce does as well. And so if you can identify that in a text, let's say you're taking the test and it's a prose piece, and you look at the date and you know it's post World War I, and you get the sense, I'm going to show you what it kind of looks like in the text, because The Great Gatsby is a very modern piece. That was part of the problem why it didn't do well as well, because that happens a lot to modern pieces. The same thing happened with Moby Dick. But the idea of post World War I text is that it's a bit fragmented. And why? Because people were really lost. Gertrude Stein called it the lost generation. And she hung out with, I mean, really, she was kind of the person who housed all these people and artists like Picasso, and she gives herself credit for Hemingway, which is probably true. But she looked at them, I guess she was a little bit older, and, you know, number one, she just made the assumption, and she was right, that you guys are just going to drink yourself to death. And that they were not whole. And which is interesting, because people coming back, I mean, you lost nearly a generation of people during the war. And if you survived it, people were looking for a new way of life, you know, having life around them. And you can look at that in one way as a way of celebrating, but in another way, just to analyze this, you know, people who go out and party a lot and drink a lot and need a lot of things going on and they're restless, that's not an indication that they're happy. That's an indication that they're suffering, and that they are doing it to try to compensate for something, to make them happy. So art is changing. People are becoming more, they're kind of migrating to Paris, because that was the place to be. Fitzgerald was there. Hemingway ended up there. Artists like Picasso, and of course he was probably already there. But people who wanted to be anybody ended up getting into those circles. And so what I was thinking about in the scene in chapter 2, where he's at that hotel, or no, he's at the apartment, Myrtle's apartment, and they have that little party. That party is probably, the people that he writes about are probably the people that he hung out with or who showed up in and out of these parties, because not everybody's going to actually be an artist, but it's going to be a lot of people who are trying to be an artist, like Chester, and that's the first thing that that we notice about him. And in a way, it's kind of mocking those artistic types of people, especially with when they're having conversations and they sound like this is really profound, but really it's just kind of frivolous. So I want to look at what does that style look like, because not only do you have to recognize it, but you have to say something about it. What happens when you read something that's stream of consciousness? Because that's got to lead you to whatever claim you're making about the theme. Okay, so I'll get there when we look at the text, but the first opening of chapter 2 is the Valley of Ashes. And this is a really important scene to remember because this is kind of the death of the American dream, right? And I'm not going to summarize chapters or give you a spark note, analysis of everything, because I assume you can get that for free somewhere else and that you're reading the book. So I'm not a plot person at all unless it seems kind of confusing. I want to try to give it to you as a perspective so that you could write in your essays maybe about this lost generation, or you might be able to recognize that in this prose he uses stream of consciousness to convey what. So we have to get to the bottom of that and getting in the habit of not just looking at it through a theory or a lens, but also looking at the prose and thinking about how you would actually talk about it, because you do have to talk about it in your essay. And if you can talk about it on the Q3 and be able to quote and be able to talk about it at a much higher level and interpretation, then it's really going to look good, because it's still a literature test. So anything that you can bring up and you can remember that is literary, you should by all means say it, do it. So, okay, so you have the Valley of Ashes, and this is where we meet Wilson and Myrtle. And the way that he describes this would be a great example, like what I was saying about a prose piece. It's halfway between West Egg and New York. All right, so it says that a motor road hastily joins the railroad and runs beside for a quarter of the mile, so as to shrink away from a certain desolate area of land. This is the Valley of Ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the forms of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally with the transcendent effort of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. Okay, so when you read a description like that, the first thing that should come to mind is industrial revolution. The industrialized descriptions. If you've ever looked at Coketown in Hard Times, okay? It really is about the aftermath or the effects of the Industrial Revolution. Even The Hobbit, really more The Lord of the Rings. So The Hobbit was kind of about that world before it was World War I, and it's before it had been destroyed by something like greed, which is what Lord of the Rings, it starts the theme in The Hobbit, but then I think he completely fulfills what he's trying to do with Lord of the Rings by showing the power of this one ring and the damage that it does. And to see so much of Europe destroyed And Tolkien wasn't quite like Fitzgerald or Hemingway in the way that he did not romanticize going to war. He did reluctantly go. He knew that most people that went just were killed. And, he thought he could do a lot better work if he, stayed here and was alive and wanted to finish Oxford. And the other boys, like Fitzgerald, left Princeton. He didn't even finish Princeton, and that was something he regretted. But Fitzgerald actually regretted even more that once he got involved with the war, it was pretty much over. So he was there late, and so he not only felt like a failure money-wise, but he didn't get to earn that romantic title of a hero as well. So, but the industrialization, when you see how beautiful Hobbiton is, and then for that to be destroyed later on is really a tragedy. And writers, and the reason why I always point this out is because you have a very good chance of running into it and being able to recognize it and saying that it's critical of industrialization will help you get to whatever claim you're trying to get, because if you can see it that way, then there's a lot more that you could say about it. Like, for instance, let's think about how you would tie that into the American dream. So the American dream hasn't gone away in this chapter. It just shows it in a different light. And the descriptions, like I said before, this contradictory language, a fantastic farm, a grotesque garden, the rising smoke, men moving dimly. This was a word that Wordsworth used a lot too when he was talking about the dim cities. And it's kind of this just purposeless, mechanical. If you worked in a factory, for instance, it's very dull and it's going to be very boring. And even though this is what it takes in order to be prosperous, this is what it takes to make money. The people who are the working class are not the ones who are really making the money. Wilson, he even has his own shop. He's not making any money. And so they really get hit the worst with it, with all of this that's happening. And anytime that we have any kind of progress or industrialization, it always comes with a price. The environment. What have we traded? What have we given up in order to have something else? And I'm not trying to sound like, we don't need it, industrialization, because we do. But writers will typically be very critical of it. And so you have kind of the byproduct is the valley of ashes of what happens to all this machinery and all this progress. Where does it lead people like Wilson and Myrtle? Okay, so, and also I want to bring up the Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's eyes, the billboard, which was probably a pretty new concept for these people to look at advertisements. I don't think we even noticed it anymore because billboards are everywhere. But to have this kind of propaganda in front of you in the eyes, and later on Wilson looks at the billboard and says, God is watching. And when I think about that, I think about the American religion that Harold Bloom talks about. And what he says in his book, The American Religion, is that Jesus is more American than he is Christ. And what he means by that is that Christ has been materialized. As people, in this country established a new democracy, they also began to also, they separated from the church. Okay, so they're separatists, and then they projected their own views, their own theology, their own doctrine, and people kind of kept breaking from the church and just kept breaking from the church, right? Until you get to transcendentalism. And then you have, you know, the idea of God and nature, and which is a nice idea. I don't think it's really a religion, but it's a nice idea. And the idea, I think what's important about it is that it was created out of the image of man. Not out of the image of God necessarily, but as the way man would like to see God. And this is what happens with Gatsby when he creates his image of what he wants to be. He can do that. And you can do that in this country. You can believe whatever you want to believe about God and make it into a religion if you want to. And if people like what they hear, then okay, fine. It's true. And so you'd have to understand somebody from a different religion looking at this country and thinking that might sound a little bit ethnocentric, just a little bit, but people don't notice it. Like I said before, they've always accepted it. So I'm going to be pointing it out just so you're more aware of it, because I was made aware of it when I was in American lit classes. In fact, probably the first time I experienced what literary people call the dark night of the soul, the night where you actually question God. I know now I wasn't really questioning God. I was questioning more of this materialized religion I was in the middle of, you know, this prosperity gospel. That's what I was questioning. At the time, I didn't know the difference, though. And that's what I saw. And that's what I see in this poster board. And it's not that big of a jump if you think about it, because how many times have we seen cutesy signs in front of churches saying how Jesus would vote, or how Jesus would feel, or how Jesus would do this or that? I mean, man is always projecting onto God, onto Christ, what he wants to see in himself. And so this is just like the American dream. The religion part of it is also connected to, and it's materialized. And I've grown up in churches where it was like this, you know, where it was like name it, claim it, you know, and I just ask students just to be aware of it and think about it. And when you're aware of it, you start to see it more. And we start to see it more in literature all the time. And it's usually satirized by authors, but overlooked by most readers.